European countries continue to import significant amounts of Russian oil and gas. So Europe is effectively funding Moscow's military operations.
India is saying that it will keep purchasing cheap oil from Russia despite a threat of penalties from President Trump.
Europe thought it could end a war with sanctions, but a key partner is undermining its entire strategy. Now, two of the world's largest economies are on a collision course over 1 billion barrels of Russian oil. What began as an economic lifeline for India has become a geopolitical headache for Europe, forcing a tense standoff between two old friends. This is how cheap Russian oil has pitted Europe against India, and why Brussels is now being forced to take action that could change their relationship forever. Section 1. The Sanctions Gambit. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Europe and its G7 allies unleashed an arsenal of economic weapons. The goal was simple: cripple Russia's war machine by choking off its main source of cash, energy. For decades, Europe had been Russia's #1 customer. In a radical shift, the EU banned all direct imports of Russian seaborne crude oil, a move designed to hit Moscow where it hurt. But to avoid sending global energy prices into orbit, they created a clever new tool, the price cap. The idea was to let Russian oil flow to the rest of the world, but only if it was sold at or below a set price, first $60 and later reduced to about $47 per barrel. This would, in theory, keep markets stable while slashing Putin's profits. And for a little while, it seemed to work. But the West didn't count on the speed and scale of one country's response, a country that didn't see a crisis but a once-in-a-generation opportunity. That country was India. Section 2. The Indian Counter-Move. India is the world's third largest oil importer, an energy-hungry nation powering one of the fastest-growing economies on Earth. Over 85% of its oil is imported, so for India, energy security isn't just policy, it's a national obsession. Before the war, India bought almost no oil from Russia, less than 1% of its total. But as Western sanctions kicked in, Russia started offering its oil at huge discounts. For New Delhi, this was a deal too good to pass up. Indian refiners started buying up cheap Russian crude at a staggering pace. Russia's share of India's oil imports exploded from almost 0 to nearly 40% at its peak. India quickly became one of Russia's biggest customers, second only to China, importing around 1.75 million barrels a day. Indian officials have been completely unapologetic about it. Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar has argued that India's first duty is to its own people, and affordable energy is non-negotiable. From India's point of view, this isn't about taking sides, it's about smart, pragmatic economics. They argue they only follow UN-mandated sanctions, not unilateral ones from the EU or US. Section 3. The Refining Loophole. This buying spree alone was causing friction, but the real flashpoint, the thing that drove Europe to act, wasn't just what India was buying, it was what India was selling. India isn't just burning all this cheap Russian oil. It's refining it into products like diesel and jet fuel and selling them right back to Europe. Here's how the loophole works. A tanker of Russian crude arrives at a massive refinery on India's coast, like Jamnagar or Vadanar. Inside, the oil is cooked, separated, and chemically changed into finished fuels. Under international trade rules, this is called substantial transformation. Once that happens, the product's country of origin is no longer Russia. It's now legally made in India. This created a loophole big enough to sail a supertanker through. So while Europe banned Russian diesel, it didn't, at first, ban Indian diesel made from Russian crude. And the numbers were wild. In 2023, India's exports of refined fuels to the EU soared by 115%, making it one of Europe's top suppliers, even overtaking Saudi Arabia for a time. In a bitter twist, Europe was helping fund Russia's war through the very sanctions meant to stop it. Section 4. Europe's painful retaliation. For months, Brussels mostly looked the other way, trapped between sanctioning Russia and keeping its own lights on. But as the trade grew, the political pressure became impossible to ignore. The breaking point came in July 2025. With its 18th sanctions package, the EU finally moved to close the loophole. The new rules explicitly banned refined fuels from other countries if they were made with Russian oil. But then the EU did something it had never done before. It directly targeted an Indian company, Nayara Energy. Nayara runs India's second-largest refinery and is 49% owned by the Russian state oil giant Rosneft, which made it a perfect target. The fallout was swift. European executives on Nayara's board quit. Shipping companies, fearing sanctions themselves, refused to handle its cargo. Critically, Western firms that provide essential services, from insurance to industrial software, began cutting their ties. The Vadanar refinery was forced to slash production. It was a direct economic hit on a company inside a partner nation, sending a clear and hostile message to New Delhi. Section 5. A diplomatic showdown. This wasn't just about oil anymore. It was about sovereignty and the shifting rules of the global game. From Europe's perspective, India was knowingly wrecking a sanctions plan designed to stop a brutal war, prioritizing profit over collective security. From India's perspective, the EU's move was peak hypocrisy. Indian diplomats shot back, pointing out that Europe spent decades happily buying Russian energy, effectively financing the very military it now wants to stop. Only when the war was at its own doorstep did Europe find its conscience, and now it lectures others for making the same economic choices. The United States jumped into the fray in August 2025, when the Trump administration hit Indian petroleum products with tariffs to apply its own pressure. But India played a clever hand, essentially telling Washington, if you want us to buy less Russian oil, then let us buy discounted oil from other sanctioned countries like Iran and Venezuela. It's a high-stakes game of diplomatic chess, where India is making it clear it's no longer a junior partner taking orders from the West. It's an independent power with its own strategy. CTA. This firestorm is far from over, and it's redefining the relationships between Europe, India, and the world. To understand the forces reshaping our planet, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications for more. Conclusion. Europe is now in a bind. To keep its sanctions on Russia credible, it had to confront India, risking a serious fallout with a vital democratic and economic partner. While the EU's actions have caused pain, India has proven resilient, using workarounds like rupee-based payments and Russia's shadow fleet of tankers to keep the oil flowing, though recent moves by companies like the Adani Group to ban sanctioned vessels have made that trickier. This standoff is more than a feud over fuel. It's a sign of a world in transition. Europe's attempt to enforce its rules has collided with India's ambition to write its own. The path forward is murky. Tightening the screws could push India closer to Russia and China, but easing off could make the entire sanctions strategy against Russia meaningless. As Europe weighs its next move, one question hangs in the air. Will the pressure force India to back down, or is this the moment that cements its position as a truly independent global power?